Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights Room. Every Thursday, Team Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region.
Good morning to everybody who is here. We're going to have more people joining us as we go. And today we have a very special guest, Alvin Tan. So you have probably seen his posts on LinkedIn, or you have probably read his articles on Medium. So Alvin is currently the editor-in-chief, chief editor of the Japonica platform on Medium, and he writes a lot about Japan and, of course, about other topics as well, but his focus is mostly on Japan. A little bit about Alvin. So Alvin studied sociology and Japanese studies in Singapore first, and also worked in a Japanese company in Singapore for 3.5 years after graduating, and then transferred to Japan, so the Japanese headquarters of that company, and worked in the headquarters for 2.5 years before moving to another company here in Japan. But now, Alvin is actually, he is dedicating his time to writing. And if you haven't seen any of his articles on Medium, I encourage you to follow him there, go to Medium and read them, because they're very insightful, very informative as well. And also, today we're going to talk about a different perspective. So I believe that for you who have followed this room, you know that we very often talk about Japanese culture and how the business culture in Japan is also very different from the Western culture. But, we have almost never talked about how Asian people actually experience Japan and its business culture and everyday life. And today we're going to have the first conversation on this topic. So, Alvin, once again, apologies for starting in such a sleepy manner, but let's start this conversation, because I'm sure that a lot of people are curious to hear your perspective. And also, before I give you the floor, to everybody who is here, please keep your questions and comments and join us once Alvin is finished with his presentation, so that we can have a discussion. And I'm sure that there are many different points of view here, not only from the point of view of the Europeans, the Americans who are in the room, but also South America and probably Africa and other parts of the world. Well, Alvin, let's start then.
Yeah, thank you, Maya, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Just a minor correction. I think you mentioned that I'm the editor-in-chief of Japonica, which is a Medium publication. But I'm afraid that honor doesn't go to me. It actually goes to DC, who's actually here with us today. He's one of the he's in the room, I think. So maybe he can tell you a bit more about this publication and what we set out to do from the beginning. So I actually didn't start this publication. I joined it later on by invitation. But that aside, I think it's a very interesting topic because when we talk about Asia and Japan and the West and so on, I think we tend to use very broad categories. For example, when we talk about Asia, people usually imagine sort of China and Korea and Japan, and to a large extent, I'm actually going to use those categories as well, because that's partly my background. And maybe I can start by talking a little bit about my background growing up in Singapore in the 1990s, and maybe that will help you contextualize where I'm coming from, and and maybe kind of listening to that, you can get a better sense of where I'm speaking from and what I'm thinking about when I'm describing the similarities or the differences. But just to give a bit of context, growing up in Singapore in the 1990s, and just to give you a bit more context about Singapore, because obviously Asia is a huge place. You have the East Asian sort of core, which is of course dominated by China, and for a long time, China was the sort of center of civilization. It's the middle country, the middle kingdom in Northeast Asia. So obviously you have a lot of this Chinese cultural influence, including like Japan was part of this sphere of influence as well, and a lot of Chinese culture was imported into Japan, including Chinese characters and kanji and so on. And then again, you have the Southeast Asian bloc, which would be where I'm actually from, Singapore. But Singapore is sort of like an outlier, an anomaly within this sphere because you have Vietnam to the north, which is sort of like bordering China. So you still feel a bit of the Chinese influence in Vietnam. But then as you go south, you go to like Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia, you start going into the Islamic sphere, right? So there is also a lot of historical. So the history of the areas it's really dominated by colonialism. So it's also something that we deal with, in seeing ourselves in relation to the West. And then at the same time, there is sort of I hesitate to use this word, but more of like the the Indo-Hindu sphere, which you have India, and then you have like Pakistan, and then you have this historical influence of Hinduism to the sort of to the south, and also towards even like in Indonesia. You still have parts of Indonesia which have and even Thailand itself is Buddhist. So you have that sort of influence from India. So I like to kind of contextualize my background as someone who was born in Singapore, and Singapore is an immigrant country. It has many races and ethnic groups and peoples from all over like all over Asia. So most of the population is Chinese in ethnic origin. I think I'm third, and my grandparents I think came to Singapore in the early 1900s, and I think my on my mother's side, I think on my father's side, I think we've been here for slightly longer than that, so maybe 3.5 generations. And I think one of the biggest influences I had when I was growing up in Singapore in the 1990s was really Japanese pop culture. So I don't know how much Japanese pop culture people in America or people in Europe get when they were growing up in the 1980s or even in the 1990s, but I was growing up in Asia and Singapore in 1990s, and we definitely got a lot of Japanese popular cultural influence. So I would turn on the radio, and then they would be playing Japanese pop songs on the radio. So you would have I don't know, like I don't even know if you've heard of these names, but like Hamazaki Ayumi was pretty big then. And then there was Speed, and there was Utada Hikaru, and she was pretty big back then as well. And a few other names as well. I don't recall all of them, but yeah. So we heard Japanese songs on the radio. So it was not something that was very strange or even like exotic to hear. So it was just one of those things, And then there was also a lot of dramas, and like Long Vacation and like Kimutaku. I mean, he was like a big hit in Singapore, actually, even before the rise of Korean pop culture and Korean dramas and so on. People were tuning in to see to dramas from Japan. So I think there was a lot of popular cultural influence from Japan in the 90s, and that sort of stayed with us even into the early 2000s before it was sort of replaced or overtaken by the Korean boom. So I think a lot of people in my generation, like the millennials, we had a lot of this influence from Japan. And growing up, I think there was also this option to learn an additional language. So in case you don't know, in Singapore we study English in school, and then most of our subjects are taught in English. But at the same time, we have to study another language, which is sort of linked to our sort of ethnic group. So for example, since I'm Chinese by descent, I studied Chinese. And on top of that, some people elect to study a third language. So in my case, I actually didn't until I got to university, where I decided to start studying Japanese. But some people do start studying Japanese, say, this is like a secondary school, which is about 13 years old. So people do get started on studying Japanese or some other foreign language, German, French. These are some of the more popular ones. They start doing that at a pretty young age. So I think there's a lot of that influence there as well. So sort of that's like the context in which I was sort of growing up. So I think the way that I see it is that when we talk about Japan and like similarities and differences, we can break everything down into sort of 4 large categories. So the first one would be, the most obvious one would be like the culture. And in terms of culture, I think you can subdivide that into physical culture and maybe like a material culture versus a sort of like values and so on. And then the other big section would be like language, which actually has a lot to do with how we sort of see the world as well. It's pretty much linked to culture. And the third area would be, politics, society, and economy, and business, and these things which sort of have an influence on how we live our lives. And I think the last part of that would be just physical appearance, and I think a lot of I think like physical appearance has some impact on how we perceive or experience Japan as well. And I think I will give a few examples later on when I talk about this. So I like to kind of go into each one of them quickly, and I don't want to do a lecture everyone. So I don't think that's interesting. I think it would be more interesting if we could have like a sort of like one sharing experiences, and if anyone has any questions, then we could take them, or we could even have a discussion later on. So I think in terms of so the first big one would be culture. So I mentioned culture because I think the largest difference between the West, and I use this term in a very uncritical way. I understand that there are obviously there are a lot of countries in the West, many different cultures and historical contexts. So I hesitate to kind of paint everything with one huge paintbrush. But I would say in general, overall, Eastern culture, I think a lot of this influence is really coming from China, at least from, we have a lot of this Confucian sort of idea sort of still permeating, like the things that we do today. So even for Singapore, I don't know about the rest of Asia, at least within sort of the Sinosphere, or the sphere that's really influenced by China. I think we still have this ethos where this sort of idea of harmony, sort of like doing things to kind of support the group. I don't think that's such a radical idea. So for someone who it's really coming from Western culture sort of perspective, like where individualism is sort of like the norm or the ideal, I think it's not that extreme for us to believe or kind of think that like we do things for the group, for the good of the larger group. So that I think is something that is not so radical for me. So that's I would say the biggest difference, perhaps. And then in terms of physical culture, and I think maybe this is a little bit superficial, but obviously most of Asia is rice eating. So I mean, to eat rice every day, that's not really strange or like different. For example, eating tofu, that's not like very strange. I've been eating tofu since I was a kid. Temples, that's not very strange either. And I think just like things like removing your shoes. I think like most parts of Asia, we don't wear shoes within the home. So that's not really something that's exotic or unique either. Then when we talk about, say, language, and I think language, that's a big part of culture and difference. So, I was studying Chinese when I was a kid, and I so like Chinese characters, obviously, I never really did very well with Chinese, just to put a disclaimer. But Chinese characters, it was just like part of life, and it was something that you had to study. And so like having to study Chinese characters in Japanese, it was not that much of a challenge. I mean, I say this with a little bit of a hesitation, but of course it was difficult. But I don't think it was that difficult compared to someone without any sort of exposure to Chinese characters, at all. So again, so this is really, really, limited to someone from sort of like the East Asian sphere. So someone, let's say if you are Indonesian, or if you're like South Asian, and you don't have exposure to Chinese characters, then that would be a very different experience. But from my perspective, Chinese characters are not that exotic. So so learning them was not that difficult. And so we had this advantage to remember Chinese characters, and most of the meanings are more or less the same. Of course, there are some exceptions, and Japanese uses Chinese characters in a specific way, and it's complicated because they have like kunyomi and onyomi, and like complicated readings, and like readings that don't get used, but then they exist, or they have like ateji and all these kind of weird applications of Chinese characters. But by and large, it's actually quite easy. It was pretty easy for me to really get used to using Chinese characters. The difficult part was actually getting around this idea of like mixing different scripts. So you have like kanji and hiragana, and everything sort of like mixed up together, which was kind of strange actually for me. So I think that's for language. And moving on to this idea of like politics and history and economics, I think like one of the largest similarities I think really comes in terms of like this field because I think most Asian countries are sort of newcomers in a sense to modernity, if I may use this term. So in a sense, I think a lot of people in Asia sort of looked up to Japan. I mean, I know there was the war and so on, but after the war, like when Japan started rebuilding and after the end of colonialism and economies all throughout Asia were like building their economies, I think a lot of us, we really looked at Japan as sort of like the model. Okay, like Japan is in Asia, they've done it, we can do it too. So for Hong Kong, for South Korea and Singapore and the so-called Asian tigers, a lot of us really look to Japan to emulate as a model for like really state-driven economic development where the government would actually invest and really drive economic development. So I think a lot of that sort of economic context is sort of shared. And just to give a quick example, I think this has nothing to do with economics, but we have the koban, right? Koban in Japan. The police officers, in the neighborhood, and we sort of copied that as well in Singapore, and just one of those elements that people like to copy. And for example, just to give another one, it's not really from Singapore, but Taiwan as well. They have a very strong historical connection to Japan, and I believe that the Gaotie, which is the high-speed train, high-speed rail in Taiwan, that connects Taipei with Kaohsiung in the south, Takao, is really like modeled on the Shinkansen. I do believe that they actually had help from Japanese engineers to build that. So definitely there was a lot of economic and scientific and business trade exchange between Japan and the rest of Asia. So by and large, we didn't see, at least for me, we didn't think of Japan as something that was a country that was really far away. It was sort of like this big brother that I think most of Asia sort of looked up to. And they were closer, they were not in the West, but at the same time they were somehow like in front of us, right? Because they got there first. So I think that was a large that had a big impact on at least on how I saw Japan and perhaps like most of how most Asian people see Japan. And just to get to the last part, then maybe we can have more of an open discussion. I think the last part would be physical appearance, and I think maybe this I can really feel a difference because obviously as an Asian, as a someone with Chinese ethnicity, by and large I can get by in Japan, in Tokyo. I can get on with life. People don't realize I'm not Japanese. I more or less look the same. If I don't speak anything, no one knows, and even if I do speak something, my Japanese is okay to the point that if it's not too long, no one realizes I'm not Japanese either. So I think there's this idea of the invisible foreigner, like invisible Asian foreigner in Japan, and I think to some extent it's true because so I hear stories of Western people. They sort of get othered by Japanese people. For example, if they walk into a store or if they go traveling, people stare at them because they look different. And obviously, I've never been stared at because I don't look different. And maybe that's a good thing because it's actually quite peaceful. No one bothers you. I mean, I don't know about you, but no one bothers me. So it's something that I kind of appreciate because I sort of blend in. And I think Chris is in the room. I don't think he's in the room, but one of my friends. He is in the room actually. So maybe we can get him up into the stage later on. But Chris, he was just telling me that he's French, and when he sits, when he's on the metro in the trains, sometimes people avoid sitting next to him because I don't know, maybe because he looks different or they're scared of him, they're intimidated by his appearance. I don't know, but that's never happened to me, and I guess that's kind of lucky. And the other thing that I kind of hear about as well sometimes is that apparently I don't know if this is true because I've never felt this, but there's this sort of if you're like a Western looking foreigner in Japan, you can kind of get away with making some Japanese cultural faux pas if you just if you play this so-called, and I don't want to like offend anyone, but if you use this sort of gaijin card, you sort of get away, and people kind of excuse you. But then for people who look more or less like Japanese people, like Asian looking, East Asian looking, then you don't have access to this card. I don't know how true that is. because I mean, like, maybe it is true to some extent because I've never felt compelled to play this gaijin card. Oh, I'm a gaijin, I don't understand the Japanese rules, because from the beginning I always understood that I'm in Japan, and even if I don't like things a certain way, I have to play by those rules. But maybe that's precisely what I'm feeling, because this idea that if you don't look, that different people don't treat you differently, then you're not expected to play this gaijin card and pretending that you don't understand, because yeah. So so overall, that's what I think. It's very broad and very vague to some extent, and I think it could be better. It might be more interesting if we have sort of like a discussion and some questions, and then that would be something more interesting. I feel.
Thank you for that context, Alvin. You really laid it out in a very easy to understand way, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to, address the point about Westerners getting othered, and I understand that point because obviously you physically stand out. I do, and as you also pointed out, sometimes Westerners, they cut us more slack because they just assume we don't know. Some of us play the gaijin card, and some of us, fumble into it without knowing. You know what I mean? And so the upside is there's a little bit less pressure, I think, and the downside is because because they let you slide often, the Japanese, you often don't learn, and you might repeat the same faux pas, not knowing that you're breaking a rule, right? So that's the downside. And I had a good friend in college who was Japanese American, and being with him opened my eyes that he was treated with a little bit of a higher standard than me, where I would break a rule unknowingly at a convenience store by going behind and taking my bottle of drinks out where I was supposed to ask the clerk, and they were supposed to do it for me, but they never told me. But they told my friend because he looked Japanese. And I've worked with Hawaiian Airlines, where you have a lot of Japanese Americans and Asian Americans as flight attendants, and they would get harsher treatment by Japanese customers because they were expected to know the etiquette better than the Western-looking people. So, obviously, I can't put myself in their shoes, but I can say what has been told to me and what I've been observed. So it's a nuanced situation. So anyway, I just wanted to make those few comments.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation. I think someone in the room is raising his or her hand.
Also, we have Yuka here on stage.
Oh, why are you talking about me?
I don't know, but we are now. Thank you for coming up on stage.
Actually, hi, Alvin. Thank you for another interesting conversation. Actually, I have, because I live in California, and I have tried to play a gaijin card, so to speak, when I got pulled over, and I pretended that I didn't understand what he was saying, but it didn't work out. But I guess you were talking about something different. But actually, I do have a two-part question. One, yes, no question. And then second, I have a follow-up question, depending on your answer, if I may. You said that you are from Singapore. So I take you live in Japan at this moment?
Yes, I've been in Japan for 6 years.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I missed that part.
Yeah, no problem.
So who do you hang out with, if I can ask? Like the Japanese young men of your age, or you sometimes hang out with the people with the same background?
Okay, so I think that's a great question. I hang out with I don't hang out with anyone because I'm too busy doing a zangyo in the office. But I'm half joking, but it is true because I do a lot of zangyo. But I think overall I think it's half. I hang out with some Japanese friends. I have like a pretty close Japanese friend, and we hang out sometimes, and a few other friends from work, a few other friends from. That I know from my time in Singapore. I did have a few Japanese friends in Singapore as well, and they've moved back. So sometimes we catch up, and so yeah, I think it's like a mix of sort of Japanese people and also like non-Japanese people. But I have to admit that I actually did a lot of zangyo in my early days of Tokyo. So unfortunately, I didn't really hang out that much. And with the coronavirus that basically happened like in the last 2.5 years, there was not a lot of opportunities to really socialize and hang out. but I'm not sure if
Okay.
this is answering your question.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
my question number one meant I didn't mean it as like a loaded question. I don't mean to
Right.
the cast any judgment over either way. It depends on your answer. Because my question actually is what I like to ask you is, the following. So because I've been thinking about this, so I'm glad that I can ask someone. So you are the it. Sorry. So have you heard of a movie, The Plan 75? Nobody heard.
Yeah.
You have?
It's the new movie, right? From the Japanese movie about what happens if you're 75 years old. It's like this fictional story about
Yes.
getting some money to die or something like that.
Correct.
From the government.
The government will institutionalize, when you reach 75, government will ask you if you are willing to die for the country, so to speak. Okay, again, this is a fiction, and then future. This is the sort of Japanese, like a futuristic Japanese government way of trying to, because they don't have, it's like they're going to have like a pension shortage. But actually, my question is not to this part. My question was what this film director was concerned with. She said, is concerned with the current Japanese society's trend in tolerance toward something different. And then she cited that, let's say, like a Filipino communities in Japan, and they get together if one of the members are getting into any hardship. And then she said, Japanese are losing that kind of sort of sympathy, compassion, sentiment. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, I'm sorry. Am I getting too serious about this? So have you noticed that though? I hope you haven't. That's my point of question. Are we getting intolerant?
I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure if I am able to answer that. But I think what you mean is okay, maybe not really to completely answer your question, and forgive me if I don't. But I think there is a sort of to make it a bit more complex. There is and I kind of say this a bit cautiously as well because I don't want to say the wrong things. But even when you talk about Asia, it's obviously a huge place, and there is sort of like a social rank, right? So let's say if you're from Singapore, then you're kind of and if you're like Chinese and you're by ethnic descent and from Singapore, then you're sort of ranking higher up because like most Japanese people have a good impression of Singapore, and I think that's got to do with a huge advertising campaign of Malayan and maybe even like Marina Bay Sands, and I think they got SMAP to do an ad, and people remember that, so they have a good impression of Singapore, and if you tell them that you're from Singapore, they go like, oh wow, okay, that's great, and they will ask you like like Lee Kuan Yew, right, blah blah blah, and then you're sort of like placed on this higher rank of being an Asian foreigner, whereas let's say if you're from China, then it might go both ways because I think there is some animosity in Japan against like say Chinese people, and this is something that you can observe if you just go onto Twitter and you look at some of the not so nice posts that people write about people from China. And I don't know if there's anyone from China in the room, and I don't want to offend anyone, but Chinese people are known for this sort of like not so civilized manners and so on. So then you're sort of like on a lower rank. And then when you get to like say Filipinos, I don't know. And again, I don't want to offend anyone. I think there is this like image, true perceived, I don't know, mostly perceived, I would say, that people from Philippines are maybe not so higher up on the social rank, and then maybe because they look a little bit different as well. They have like darker skin, and I don't know if there is like the discrimination there, but I would say that there is definitely a social rank to what kind of Asian foreigner you are. So and I don't know to what extent this penetrates the Japanese the average person's sort of mentality, but I do believe that there is a bit of that. To what extent, I don't know, and I hesitate to say because I don't have any research to back this up, but I think that it's there. And to what extent, I cannot say for sure.
Okay, thank you. Great answer. And again, I apologize if I put you on the spot, and I tend to do that, But sometimes, if I've been thinking about something, and then whatever opportunity I get, I ask, out of context, like a cookie ga yomenai,
It's fine.
By the way, people call that KY, and I just learned that. Have you known that? But anyway, I'm sorry. I got off that tangent. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Yuka. As always, I appreciate the question. Maya, did you have something to ask Alvin?
I wanted to add a little bit to what Yuka said about this empathy thing and how, some people worry that here in Japan, especially, some people are losing that ability to sympathize with others who are in trouble. And yes, I wonder whether Alvin has noticed that or not. But my impression is that, yes, there is such a trend here, especially in the urban areas where the communities are much smaller. And I think that feeling actually remains in smaller community, probably in rural communities. The trend is not broken there, because I have relatives who live in Shizuoka, and I can see how they get together when somebody in that community is actually, in a need of help or assistance. So, but I don't know, Alvin, what's your observation on this?
Sorry, the observation on what specifically?
Okay, whether people here are losing their ability to sympathize and get together when a member of their community is in need of help.
Yeah, I think it's pretty difficult to say for sure, but I think it could be something more related to rural versus urban sort of divide, and people in urban areas are more individualistic or less likely to help someone else within the community. Whereas I think within rural areas, and forgive me if I'm mistaken, I think there is more of that remains, and I think it's definitely something that's not cultural, but more related to how many people you live with, and whether you're from the city or whether you're living in rural area. So I think it's more related to that. So yeah, I'm not like maybe answering the question.
Oh no, you are.
Yeah.
Oh, Yuka, please go.
No, sorry. Yeah, actually, it's not only limited to Japanese people in Japan.
Exactly.
Actually, here, somebody was telling me, in Japanese community in California, we have a community, but seems like we don't help come to rescue of others who are in trouble compared to the other ethnic group. That's and somebody mentioned that to me too. That's why I'm thinking is there something that we have to rethink about what is really being Japanese means to us. But anyway, thank you. Sorry, that's not the on topic of the room. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Yuka. Your perspective, we appreciate it always very much. So thank you. And I'm happy to see that Legion, you have joined us, Stephen as well. So Legion, thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me, Maya?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, everybody.
Yeah, I'm at the station now. Sorry, maybe it's a little noisy around me.
It is, but yes, we can hear you well.
Yeah, thank you. First, I'd like thank you for your invitation through LinkedIn. Thank you very much. And I'd like to give a little echo about Alvin's talk on culture difference.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I'm Chinese, and I have been living in Japan over 10 years. And I have lived in Sendai, Nagoya, and Tokyo. Also, I have go to some other country areas because I have many work counterparts around Japan. So first, I'd like to give echo with Alvin's comments on culture. Basically, in some people from perspective from some Western people, they will think Chinese and the Japanese culture are the same. But I think the Chinese and Japanese culture are absolutely different. Maybe historically, Japanese culture are from Chinese culture, but now the culture is absolutely different.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people realize that once you come to this, once you come to Japan or China, it's really something which you feel very well, I'd say. But I think if you're on the other side of the world, it's difficult to make the difference. So
based on my experience or my feelings, I think there are two big differences. The first one is how to say, Japanese guys are not so interested about politics. But the Chinese people is different. Is very, very interested about politics.
Oh, that's a good observation.
Yeah. So based on this difference, there are how to say complicated relationship between Japan and China, even Japanese and Chinese. because Japanese are not interested in politics, so many information they just get from the mass media, such as Yahoo News or something else. Mm-hmm. And in China, many people are very, very interested about the politics, so they will get information from not only the official media website, also some personal media sites. So there are many different opinions between China and Japan. So this is also the reason why, Chinese and Japanese look different on something.
Yes, that's an interesting observation. And yes, I wonder also how Alvin feels about this, because Alvin is also of Chinese origin, but he was born and raised in Singapore. So are there any shared points, Alvin, in this, or what's your observation in this sense of the word?
Yeah, I think, of course it would be a mistake. It would be a mistake to, conflate Japanese culture with Chinese culture, and obviously they're very different. Even though, and I don't know if this is true, but probably the Western impact on Japan, and especially the American impact on Japan since the 1950s, is larger than most people believe. And for example, just like something pretty superficial, maybe, even in terms of the food that people eat. I think the Japanese diet is actually a lot more westernized than what people eat like 50 years ago, or even like 100 years ago. So there's definitely the element of Western impact on the Japanese diet. So that's just like one layer. And then if you go deeper, you see that there are like even more differences in how Chinese and Japanese people sort of see the world. So I think in the realm of politics, that's just that could be one expression of it, so that's one. And I think especially if you're talking about China is still a pretty young country in the sense of in the modern sense of being a country of development and so on. So China is still a growing economy, whereas Japan is I apologize again, it's sort of like a declining economy. So I think the confidence levels of Japanese people versus Chinese people, they're sort of like inverse. They Chinese people are sort of like having this confidence now, and Japanese economy sort of on the decline. So you also see this being expressed in the sort of mentality of the people. So I think Chinese people are also more risk taking. I think they invest and they buy property and so on. And you don't see that sort of mentality within Japanese people to the same extent, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with Alvin. Yeah, actually, I feel the Japanese people are more traditional, but Chinese more risk taker. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the observation, Legion. Yes, if you have another point to make, please don't hesitate to do so.
Yeah, thank you. So I will taking the train in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. And Stephen, good morning. Thank you for coming up on stage.
Good morning, guys. Been a while.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back a bit on the point you were making about the ability to feel sympathy and help others. And I want to come from a perspective of the rural Japan. I'm not too familiar with how things are in Tokyo, but I'm thinking that in a big city, obviously the relationship between the concept of sympathy is a bit different. And that's because I really feel like in general, the Japanese society in Japan, they have the ability to sympathize with foreigners coming from other country in Asia or other country in general. And you see this very often, that they have no problem doing this. And simply because there's a difference between sympathizing with someone's experience or empathizing. And that's what, in my view, the Japanese society has a hard time doing, is to show empathy for those foreigners. And let me explain. It all comes from a place of power. So it's easy to sympathize with others and acknowledging their struggle or their situation simply because you're not in their shoes. So you're comfortably in your position in society. And as Alvin mentioned earlier, there's like a certain rank, and of course, being in Japan as a Japanese, you are obviously higher in the social ranking simply because of your nationality. This is your home country. But when it comes to empathizing, you see this often with Japanese people that actually travel on their own, have an experience outside Japan, and experience being on their own in a different country with different culture, different language, different ways. And I'm not talking about people that travel, because we know that there's a lot of Japanese travelers traveling around the world, but when they travel, they usually travel in groups. So they bring that little Japan of theirs, that little bubble, Japanese bubble, with them when they travel, whether in Europe, China, Singapore, wherever, where they still bring their comfort zone with them. So they never get to really experience what it's like to be a foreigner in a foreign country. So Japanese people that actually experience that are most likely to be more tolerant or show more empathy towards foreigner living in their own country. And but not everybody is willing to actually give away that power, you know. So the sympathy is there for sure, but beside people that actually experienced the same thing that a Chinese person would experience in Japan, or Filipino, or Singaporean, or European, or American. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Yes, I can see we all come from different experiences, actually. And of course, if we have, if we can relate to what is happening to other people based on our personal experiences, we can be more empathetic. And I think that it is true not only in Japan, actually, but I can say that it is true back home, in Bulgaria. I can see people who have lived overseas and who have been in trouble there. I mean, in terms of not being fluent with the language and, and so on and so on. They're much more open and much more inclined to help the foreigners who live there than the people who have never been overseas or who have never crossed the border of the country, actually. But yes, it's true. I agree with you that there is this this tendency, and just my yes, let's say, if I can make it, if I can specify, I think that it's more general than we want to think it is. Yes, thank you for that. And Ken, good morning.
Hello, good
Hello.
morning from Singapore. I find it very interesting. I'm a Japanese living in Singapore for the last 18 years. So I have a quick question and comment on one topic. I was listening the last 10 minutes, so I may repeat the same topic. But compared to typical gaijin living in Japan, Alvin, you may pass as a Japanese if you try, and I can pass as a Singaporean if I try. And that's actually I've been trying, because that sort of saves a lot of hassle in my life. I lived in US and Mexico before, but every day I got a question, where are you from? Why you speak Spanish or English? But the advantage of living in a country where the racial composition is more like for original country. So my question is, Alvin, do you take this as an advantage, or do you try not to be Japanese, that you always say you keep your Singaporean identity? And just a quick comment is, I had a very satisfying moment in Singapore about 5 years ago. I was negotiating a price at the shopping mall with a Singaporean photo shop about my family photo taking. And then the guy told me that he can give me 20% discount. And I told my wife, who is a Japanese, in Japanese, 2割引きだけどどうする? And my wife said, okay, いいですね. Then I told the guy, it's okay, we take 20% off. And the guy told me, oh, your wife is Japanese. And that was a very satisfying moment. Then what am I? But I felt I got sort of assimilated into the local society. So the question is, what's your comment on this, Alvin?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think a very, very interesting story that you shared. Thank you. And I think for me at least, it's not something that I'm very conscious of. It's not something that I think about 24/7. Like, oh, I'm not Japanese, I'm Singaporean. Oh, I think it's something that I really actually don't think about until like just talking to people. I don't have this strong sense of, oh, I'm a foreigner. I'm just me. So I think people also don't really notice, or like they don't think about it as well until I make a mistake in Japanese, and they say, oh, okay, I forgot you were like not Singaporean. You are not Japanese. But I mean, of course, they mean that in a kind of a friendly way. It's just a joke that we kind of have. I kind of have with my friends. I think the one of the advantages of like being able to pass, I would say, is that I think yeah, you're completely correct that it's just a little lot. It's much more hassle free to just pass sometimes, and you don't have to deal with questions of where you're from and why do you speak Japanese, blah blah. And I think yeah, it just makes life a little easier and like yeah, just walking on the street, no one cares about you. You kind of just blend in, you become part of the environment. So I think there is an advantage to that, and I mean personally, I don't try to play the gaijin card, or I just go about daily life as most Japanese people would. That being said, there are some situations in which I do get frustrated with the things, the way things are done in Japan. Like, for example, just to give one example, like dealing with government office, that's always a challenge because I can't fill in my name properly inside the most of the forms. I usually shorten my name, so my name doesn't fit into the standard forms, and all these are mine sort of bureaucratic details do kind of remind you that you're not Japanese. So every time I fill in my name on a form, I kind of write in katakana. So that reminds me that I'm not Japanese. But other than that, I think there is an advantage to being able to pass. It's just a lot less hassle, and yeah, I think it's also a good thing.
Thank you very much.
Make use of that, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
That's a great topic, Maya. Maybe just, what annoys you the most in Japan topic? I'm just kidding.
Yes, I'm afraid that it is also a kind of tacky or, I don't know, a dangerous topic, because...
Okay, you're right. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
I'm going to offend somebody, definitely. Okay, you're right. Yeah, okay, I take it back.
No, that's okay. Of course, we can always define, let's say the range of comments on that topic, but because we always, Tim and I, we have been very careful not to actually invite bashing of Japan, because we all live in this country and it's our home at the moment. And while we know that there are a lot of things which need to be improved and which can be improved, there is also a lot which is good and we need to acknowledge it. So finding the right balance is very important. And yeah, that's why I think, we need to just define the, let's say, boundaries.
That's a good point, Maya. Yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about what annoys me in the U.S., but again, I have chosen this, and the country is, generous enough to allow me to live. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, let's not do that. Annoying option. By the way, I just heard the sound of Japanese stations. Man, that makes me homesick. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Could I just quickly circle back to the empathy topic? And I just wanted to make the point that I understand the urban-rural distinction, and I feel it. I'm out in Shizuoka, so I guess I see it. But I would also suggest that maybe there's a generational dimension. And again, looking at people my age in Japan, back then there was this keen interest in everything in the West, the music, the pop culture, particularly the US, but Europe as well. And so there was always this keen interest in me because I was a foreigner. And I always found it was very easy to make friends. And on a public level, and maybe this is related to Uchi and Soto, but on a public level, I didn't necessarily feel empathy from Japanese people who didn't know me. But I did feel much empathy from Japanese people with whom I had developed relationships with. As for the generational shift, though, I don't have enough interaction with the younger Japanese generation to be able to make a comparison and say, yeah, it's generational. But I suspect that maybe that is one dimension that could be missing.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because we very seldom acknowledge the fact that different generations come with their specific characteristics. And we often like to lump the whole society into just the Japanese society or the American society. But, well, things change so fast. And also, generations, they have their own values. And we have seen this even, nowadays we have, the millennial generation here, not only here, but throughout the world, of course, globally. And then the Generation Z, and as you say, Tim, the boom, what's that? Sorry.
Dankai no Sedai,
Yes,
the
the
boomers, and
Dankai,
even
yes,
a
the
little
baby
bit younger.
boomers.
Yeah,
Yes,
even younger too, in their 60s and early 70s.
yes,
That's kind of
yes.
my generation that I dealt with.
Yes. Which reminds me, of the fact that we really need to be more sensitive towards these differences. And of course, the point you made about Uchi and Soto, the inner group and the outer world, here in Japan, it's very well defined. And yes, if you need help, and I mean, it's much more likely that you get that help from the members of your community or your family or your group than people whom you have not interacted at all, or just superficially. Yes, I like that point because we also need to remember it here in Japan.
So I just wanted to mention though, and then again to defend Japan. Oh, anyway, just a couple months ago in New York, have you heard of this lady who, I guess at the Central Park or maybe somewhere else, but starts spraying the 3 Asian-looking young girls and then telling them, go back to where you are from. So, this lack of sympathy, empathy, it can happen anywhere. So we just, wanted to throw that, out there again. It's a difficult issue, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know how to end this comment, but thank you.
With what Tim added to this, there's something that I deeply feel about the Japanese society in general is, and I may be wrong, but this is my impression, is that somehow they're seeking validation from the West, rather than, like for everything that has been done. And but on the other hand, this doesn't apply for other countries in the East. Like we talk about China and all the things. So it's funny. And so Tim, when you mentioned about the music culture, for example. So yeah, there's a genuine interest, and you can build a great relationship with people that are very much fascinated by what's happening in the West. And that creates a lot of bond. But what I mean by sympathy and empathy and the position of power is, from my experience, when you give away that power by highlighting some of the weaknesses that you have as somebody coming from the West, for example, then you see a little switch in how you are being perceived. It's pretty much like, oh, okay, so you're not that much. You're not that much of a person that I can look up to, like I thought, and then the interaction and that you have with people in the society is changing drastically. So that's the point I wanted to make as well.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, it's also important to know or to hear that and be aware of such, I would say, for some people reality, for others such point of view. Well, so we are 5 minutes past 9 o'clock now, and this is usually the time when we close the room because it's a working day. We are still in the morning of Thursday, and people are getting ready for work or already at their working places. So Alvin, thank you very much for being our guest speaker today and for making this room so interesting.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.